Welcome, everyone, to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, your weekly dose of insider DevOps trends, AWS news, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community, plus a live Q&A you can't find anywhere else. It's February 21st, 2024. My name is Eric Osterman, and I'll be your host. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. We are a DevOps accelerator focused on funded startups and enterprises that helps teams who are overwhelmed with AWS. And we do this by using our over 200 battle-tested Terraform modules that have been downloaded over 100 million times. So no matter where you find yourself on this journey, we're here to help your startup raise or launch better products faster so you can free up your bandwidth for innovation and nail your value delivery every time. So if you and your team are struggling with underperforming infrastructure, just head over to cloudposse.com/quiz, answer a few quick questions, and you'll book a session with me directly. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is informal. Engage as much as you'd like, ask questions, and if you're curious about any of our open source tools or modules, go for it. For those on the recording, we host these calls live. You can register for these at cloudposse.com/officehours. Again, cloudposse.com/officehours, so don't miss out. Now, I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's office hours valuable, please share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse, or maybe send us a short testimonial about the value you're getting. You can do that by joining us in Slack. Go to slack.cloudposse.com, or just leaving a comment in the YouTube comments. So with that said, let's jump into announcements. So the first thing that jumped out, sadly, we announced last week and then a preview to that the week before or something about the impending demise at Weaveworks. They have officially, gone bankrupt and are giving away their enterprise solution now as open source. So, bittersweet ending to that saga. This is everything that you needed for the team workspaces, the cluster API for cluster creation. I assume it's the interactive dashboard, but I haven't looked into that. I'm guessing that's the team workspaces product. So something worth checking out. Has anyone looked into that more? All right. Then that's literally just a GitHub repo with the source code, so you can go pull it down. So speed test, this was on the docket for last week. We just didn't get to it. Here's a write-up of kind of how the number of tests that they're doing has increased so dramatically since 2006 when they launched, to doing a total of 50 billion speed tests in 2023. That's a pretty remarkable number. And I think it was Michael Jenkins maybe who shared this in the channel. I think they go into some of their challenges doing this, but I don't see that here. Michael, are you here? Or did I get it totally wrong and it wasn't you? All right.
I shared something last week, but I can't remember what it was, to be honest.
That's all right. There's a lot of that. All right. Next announcement is Matt, you shared this one with me. I didn't have a chance to look at it yet.
Yeah, basically there's a public data set out there for like the internet traffic, and this guy was running some queries using BigQuery, which they link to off of their website, and he inadvertently created a $14,000 bill because he processed like 2.6 petabytes of data using BigQuery, and essentially they said, sorry, you ran the query, you still owe us the $14,000.
Oh,
yeah. So yeah, so be careful. I guess they said if you scroll down a little bit, I think that, it's right there on that diagram over to the right. They showed there's like a green check right in the top right corner of it where it says this query will process 2.66 petabytes when run. And they're basically saying like, well, we told you that this was going to take that much time up, and then you hit run. So, that now then someone later in the thread kind of like chimed in and said, well, maybe we'll make that more prominent, where you actually have to acknowledge like how much your query is going to take up from an estimated perspective.
Yeah, but even that isn't like it's such an abstract concept. 2.66 petabytes of data compared to 1 terabyte or everything else. It should have a dollar amount or a dollar range.
Yeah, I think it's $6.25 per terabyte.
Oh, so
when you run it,
calculate, then it should just give a freaking dollar. Everyone understands.
Yeah. They definitely do that, but they didn't do it here. And long story short, he created a $14,000 bill, and you have to put in like a credit card to use that part of it, and it got charged, like his credit card got charged for like $14,000 or something like that. So yeah, it's pretty rough.
How do you bring that up to your
Yeah, I don't know, but that's one of those.
Weekend doing a little bit of side work. Oh man.
Yeah, apparently it's the HTTP archive is like an archive from Google of like all this, like all sorts of data, like how the web is grown over years or whatever. So it's a gigantic data set. So you have to be very careful when running queries over gigantic data sets with these like analysis tools, especially the ones that are charging per gigabyte, terabyte, whatever.
How long did it take for him to get the answer?
Like 2 hours, he said, or something like that. Yeah, it wasn't, but he knew it was going to take a long time. I guess he just didn't realize that that would, what would happen, I guess. So I guess it's like he signed up. There's a free tier. The free tier gives you a terabyte per month, basically. And then, but when you sign up, you have to give it a credit card for overages, just like when you sign up for an AWS account. And then he ran this, and so they also encouraged him on his account to enable like spend limits as well, like so this wouldn't have happened. But
does AWS provide the ability to have spend limits?
I think so. I think budgets can actually be like enforced.
Okay.
Yeah. Although I'm not sure exactly how that would be implemented. Like, do they turn off all your cloud resources when you hit that, or what? Like, I'm not exactly sure.
Anyone know more about that one? How can you enforce a budget on AWS?
I've looked into it a little bit. You can set caps on certain services, and yeah, they will turn down your resources if you exceed the cap.
Is there API support for that?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, it actually says you can use AWS budgets to track and take action on your AWS costs and usage.
Just deploy this Lambda and the CICD pipelines for the Lambda and the artifact storage for the Lambda.
No, I mean, it's a managed service. So you create the budget, and then you can actually say that the budget is AWS budget actions is the thing that you enable, and then the budget actions are basically like thresholds, and then the action is like terminate email. You can send emails, you can send SNS topics, you can do a bunch of other things, but then it looks like you can also terminate resources.
All right. There's another interesting one. And also something really kind of interesting to me, because I don't know how GitLab would have gotten away with this, but so GitLab has for a long time offered a solution around Terraform continuous delivery. I'm not sure if it does testing as well. They are now replacing Terraform officially with OpenTofu as part of this work. But it really is this gray area for me when this is GitLab, the company, building a solution to use previous, the now BSL licensed Terraform, run on GitLab, the service. That seems to, I don't know, that seems to be too analogous to something like a Spacelift N0 or Scalar for providing a managed service for Terraform.
Yeah, I guess I don't understand the point though. Are you saying that, like, I think the reason they're doing this is to comply with the
But does that, yeah, exactly. Okay, so I agree that it is to comply. But what have they done in the interim? Does any kind of,
I mean, I don't think you can reasonably change your license midstream and tell people that they have to comply immediately. So they've probably taken whatever steps it took to do this, and it took this long to switch. And at the end of the day, like, they might have pinned it so it couldn't go beyond the open source version up until now.
Right.
And then now they're saying we now support,
people using it know if they had restricted it to Terraform versions 1.5.
Yeah, I don't know.
Michael, I see you have your hands up.
Yeah, I mean, in this case, this is just the Terraform templates, so they're not running Terraform and they're not offering Terraform.
No,
they have a pre-built set of templates, just like in GitLab or GitHub. You can grab anybody's GitHub actions. They happen to have some default templates for Terraform for other people to run Terraform to do whatever they're going to do.
But on their platform my nuance is, and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know these things. It just feels like now if GitHub, the company, was managing those templates for how to do Terraform, and you can use that on GitHub, how is that different from a Spacelift or M0? Versus Cloud Posse creates GitHub actions that you can run however you run them. We have no control over that.
If you look into this, you'll find that the templates are also community managed. So there's a gray area where GitLab people are offering templates, but those templates are buried in different places. They're part of the extended community. So GitLab and not GitLab is not always clear. They incorporate and link to, same thing on GitHub, right? A lot of those templates in the quote unquote marketplace have nothing to do with GitHub official sources. You can go grab, if you enable CodeQL and try to grab Sneak, then Sneak's links out to the Sneak's repository. And the same thing here with the templates. They have some of them linked in, but a lot of them are linked in from just people who are active in the community project,
Okay, so sorry. So that makes sense to me more, especially reading this here. But what I was curious about, I thought when I heard about that Terraform offering with part of GitLab, I thought it was more than templates originally. I thought it was almost like Azure DevOps in terms of integration into the product, but it never was.
There is. There is. There's a lot more in if you choose to use the backend state management. If you use the release and rollback capabilities associated with that. So those are beyond this, though. This is just templates. There's some really fun support for managing releases related to using GitLab's backend support for Terraform. And that's probably going to get your hair up more in the area that you open the topic with. And I think it's more on target with raising the questions you open the topic with, is the backend Terraform state management.
Are they keeping that?
I have no idea. I haven't been I haven't had the luxury to work in GitLab very much lately.
I know you miss it, you were saying.
Yeah, it's an enjoyable place. A coworker of ours recently moved over to GitLab and Michael Rosenfeld, and he was very happy to be working in GitLab. His new organization is all GitLab based.
Yeah, he was pinging us about Atmos GitLab Actions.
I wasn't pushing him. That's
Yeah.
all him.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's interesting. All right. Yeah, so and this just confirms that this is related to the BSL change. So then going back here. Yeah, Sequoia has announced a fund to sponsor a few developers working on open source without giving up equity. Obviously, they're hedging on the side probably that it might turn into a real business that they can then invest in, and that would be for equity. It's nice. I'd like to see more of this kind of sponsorship of driven independent open source projects being sponsored by backers like Sequoia or other funds. Next announcement is this came up by Jeremy on our team, Jeremy White. He said that a lot of people have been using this in combination or conjunction with dev containers. We've often struggled with how to solve command line authentication with SSO. Used a lot of tools over the years, SAML to AWS, AWS-SSO. Those all relied on screen scraping techniques that often get flagged by the WAFs of Google and other IDPs. So we settled on Leapp, and we've been using Leapp happily for many years now. SAML.to wasn't on my radar, but apparently it fulfills a similar need. But is not so much a desktop UI as it is a CLI that will launch your browser however your browser is configured. So it doesn't do screen scraping in the mechanisms that AWS to SAML or the others used. So it shouldn't trigger those.
Yeah, maybe I misunderstood when I read this, but I think they're attempting to like replace your IDP somehow. So if you read like right in their top thing, it says something about like replace Okta Jump Cloud or AWS SSO or homegrown scripts to assume roles.
I got the homegrown scripts part. Yeah, why would that does to me, I thought it was how to assume role with those and based on those configurations.
Yeah, if you read the whole thing, it says that GitHub is the identity provider of source for all of this too. So basically it's doing something to configure the OIDC, I think OIDC, and then it's calling something to then exchange GitHub's OIDC token for
Gotcha.
for actual role assumption.
Huh. Okay, I see. To me, that seems like a clever idea, but it doesn't seem like a productized, something you can productize. So that's what they're productizing. Free for 1,000 role assumptions, but then beyond that. I guess that makes sense for smaller companies. You don't have to introduce yet another IDP, and you get IDP-like functionality via GitHub. I remember how cool that was back in the day when we were using gravitational teleport, and gravitational actually supported that for free. So you could use gravitational teleport with GitHub SSO for free. But if you wanted to use Okta or any of the other options, that's when it triggered the enterprise upgrade. This is taking a different approach.
So basically it's getting, I just was reading the doc real quick. So it's getting the either the user scoped or repository scoped token from the GitHub API, and then it's calling the AWS assume with federated identity, assume role with federated identity API call under the hood, and it's using that token to exchange it for like the session token to assume that role, basically.
And it is interesting, they do offer additional identity providers for the solution.
Probably not built yet.
Yeah, it's not in their docs. I'll
Yeah.
say that. It says that GitHub is the only one that's listed there as supported.
Okay.
I'd be interested who Scaffoldly is, the company who made the, or maybe that's just the template actually. Oh no, it is actually, they have a few little tools that I've never heard of. So this got me excited for a second because I was going to say, oh, there's a solution to doing code spaces with, assuming a role. And now I want to ask that as my question to follow up for this, because how are folks doing role assumption in code spaces or in dev containers, whatever you want to call it? It feels like that's a hard problem. This seemed to be providing an elegant solution, maybe, but if it's just a wrapper around role assumption for GitHub, then it makes it less appealing. Anyway,
Yeah.
maybe a question I'll save for after you're through all
Teams
your
that haven't
announcements.
yet invested in like that whole strategy and probably won't be going to Okta ever. So it's really targeting, I think, a small niche group. I mean, if as an independent developer or working on small projects, and I didn't want to introduce Okta or the other solutions, sounds kind of interesting. I just thought this is just so hilarious to me. It's like first there was cloud and there was AWS, and then you needed to start testing that, but it was too costly to test it, and you couldn't test it offline. So therefore, local stack was created, so you could do faster, less expensive testing locally, and then we want to host the local stack as a service. So this thing that emulates being a cloud in as a cloud, that's not a cloud. Kind of.
I'm assuming that so you can run it in CI, right? I think that's probably the usage of why to do it there. But
yeah.
But at that point, why to what you're saying, Eric, why not have an AWS account?
If you're running in CI and your CI is in the cloud and you're doing this for CI resources, yeah. Yeah.
Because it's quicker.
Possibly.
And it doesn't really create
money.
resources that cost you money.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's probably the reason.
Seems like so it doesn't, but does Local Stack as a company provide that as a service? They don't offer.
I think they do. They have something along those lines, yeah.
Yeah, they do.
But it's expensive.
Yeah, they're not cheap.
When I saw this, I always assumed it was not a hosted solution, but just a license, like Docker, right? Like a Docker for desktop license.
Look at the second the second bullet, the CI performance tier and CI starter tier. That's actually like the ability to run that in CI.
Yeah.
And there are also certain resources that are only available in the pro
That'd be
version.
like, to me, that would be like, oh, you get a GitHub action with a key and you can use that to do it. But I still wouldn't assume that it was like running by them in their infrastructure.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but I know definitely that there are certain resources in local stack that are only available like if you have a pro license.
All right. What was I gonna do? Yeah, next.
I just want to make one more of the SAML.to thing just
Yep.
really quickly. It installs a GitHub app like in your org and then does a bunch of things. And I would actually really be curious. I have to dig in, but what it's doing seems like it might be a little dangerous because it's actually like in your GitHub in your AWS config, you're essentially saying like I trust a particular repository, like a particular GitHub repository to like assume this role and run certain things, and then they're like the GitHub actions will essentially run with one of its tokens. It will use one of its tokens to exchange, credentials for that. And it sounds like without having dug all the way in, but it sounds like they're then intentionally like leaking those credentials, which are intended for use there to a user to be able to then do things on the behalf of like a repository. So it sounds, unless I'm missing something, it doesn't sound like the cleanest thing from a security perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like a hack. Like they figured out a way to do it, but the convoluted path to getting there is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I could be wrong on that, but that's my quick read of what it seems to be doing.
All right. Next up is, oops, where was I? There we go. Yeah, Account Factory for Terraform has, this is not to be confused with the newly announced Terraform AWS provider support for Control Tower. This is the original AFT account factories for Terraform. They've added apparently something to that to allow for some greater customization, most notably whether or not to deploy a VPC as part of it, which was kind of annoying that it would deploy this additional VPC. And I'm using AFT. The whole point is to use Terraform. And why are you deploying this VPC that I didn't ask you to deploy? So that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the original reason was that they actually deployed like a temporary EC2 instance into that VPC that was the thing that actually did the provisioning.
Really?
Like, and it ran on that, and I think it ran on that so that it could actually like act on like from inside the things that were being provisioned. Or at least that's what someone explained to me when I asked the question one time.
Sounds like another hack. Like what? I've
No.
never like even really looked into this too much, but also just reading this announcement sounds like it sets up a Terraform pipeline to help you provision. Oh wait, is now AWS, in fighting the license war? Like
exactly.
yeah.
I think if you read the announcement, this was jointly like released with HashiCorp, so I'm sure they are blessed to be able to do that under the license agreement. So you don't have to worry about that part.
Yeah, I was never able, when this whole thing came out, that was one of the big things I brought up. I never got a straight answer on it. There's this, and there's also Neptune or something, or what? They have some other like IAC tool that supports Terraform in AWS, and haven't gotten. But yeah, it was all announced at around the same time, but without mention of licenses.
Are you talking about their like developer self-service tool? I think it's called like Proton or something like that.
Oh, that's it. I think it's Proton. Yeah.
Maybe. Yeah, something like that.
All right. Next announcement is all right. So that's the end of those announcements. Then I just wanted to finish where I was last week on these two. But I know I've been putting off some of these questions here. So why don't I cover some of these first if it's still timely. And then we'll get to those. So, Alex, are you here today?
He was. It looks like he just left.
Sorry, Alex. All right. And then Eric, is he on? No. This is another Eric, Elo. And external secrets, operator alternatives. Who was asking that? Let me check here. That was Rohan. Do we have Rohan here? No Rohan. All right, so we'll get to those maybe next time if they join. Going back here then. So I'll cover these two here because I think these are good for stoking conversation, and I'd like to hear if there are any other suggestions or best practices. Now, these are written in the context of Atmos, a tool that we've written. However, I'd like to say that they are more general than the tool we've written. Our tool that we have called Atmos just works better if you follow these best practices. So let me get into it. So first thing is stacks. So Atmos stacks is a concept or a way that you can organize your infrastructure by toolchain, define all the configuration for it. So like your variables, and you can do things like import configuration from other stacks, from other configs. So it's hierarchical and everything gets deep merged. So here you can import like all your baseline configuration, and then here are all your overrides. So best practices now we talk about here for stacks is avoiding too dry configurations would be a good place to start. And I should maybe reorganize the order here. But the idea is that, you know, as developers, we have often a knee-jerk reaction to make super dry configuration. But what if the tooling that you use allows your configuration to become so insanely dry that it's actually a disservice for the users? And I think we've kind of achieved that with Atmos. So we had to create a best practice here. So hinting to people, you know, make dry configuration, but balance that with legibility and clarity so people understand what's going on. And within Atmos, it's also making sure that you don't have too many levels of inheritance. So, you know, D depends on C, depends on B, depends on A. It gets very hard for anyone else to understand what's going on in the configuration. The next one is templating. So in our configurations for Atmos, these stacks here, we actually support something called Go templating. And it's powerful, but it should be treated as an escape hatch. So we really don't recommend leaning on templating too much within Atmos stack configurations if you're using that. And that's because it's basically like a Helm chart at that point. And it gets kind of complicated to intuit what's going to happen from that configuration you're looking at without actually running the configuration. So we don't like that. It's actually one of the things that we don't like HCL, HashiCorp's configuration language, started out as strictly like a pure configuration format and evolved into having more of the constructs of a language that make it less of a configuration in my mind. It's harder to understand what it's actually configuring, what the net outcome is. So for the same reason, that's why we don't want to suggest doing that too much in the YAML as well. Code generation. So when you are doing a lot of Terraform, we really don't recommend doing code generation of HCL itself, because what you have then is something that's dynamic, constantly changing, akin to meta programming. And it's hard to test for all the different combinations of what you have there. It's also really, it's only something that you can do internally at your organization as well. Like, so one of the big reasons Cloud Posse has been not a proponent for code generation as it relates to Terraform, is how do you create an open source ecosystem where the ecosystem is based on Terraform code that gets generated? And then how do you test that that stuff actually works? There's not a practical or way to do it. It's challenging. So we've therefore been forced to come up with efficient, effective ways to use Terraform at scale that don't rely on code generation. And the last one, mix and pattern. I guess it's probably without having a lot of experience using Atmos. This is one's probably a little bit too abstract, so I'm going to skip over that one and jump over onto components and best practices for components. These will have the largest relevancy to you if you are using Terraform at your organization. Whether or not you're using our tool chain or not, I think these are pretty good general recommendations for how to write your root modules in Terraform. So first one is to keep your components small to reduce the blast radius of changes. I've seen like 2 posts on Reddit in the past week, and their problems stem from this, that they have these root modules and the root modules grow and grow and grow and grow. And then suddenly they take, an hour or 2 hours to run. Or every time you do it, you risk breaking something else because there's too much going on. So make sure you keep your root modules small. And then how do you do that? Well, you should split them by the life cycle. So like your network layer, your VPCs have a very different life cycle from your clusters. So make sure those are 2 different components. Make your components opinionated. They're there to solve your business problems, your root modules, but don't make them so opinionated that they can only work for one team within your enterprise or within your company. So make them generalized enough, for example, like a VPC. It can be opinionated as to how you want your VPCs to be created, but it shouldn't be so opinionated that it only works with ECS or something, or with EKS or for something else. Make them parameterizable so they're reusable for that use case. Avoid over-parameterization. So when you look at like Terraform AWS community modules, one of the problem with those modules is they're used by so many people for so many different use cases, and they support every feature that AWS offers for doing that thing. So they have like 100 different parameters or 200 parameters. There's no way you can test that combination of parameters. So when you're building your root modules for your company, consider keeping those parameters small enough so it's practical to test. Component libraries and vendoring. So this is one thing that Atmos makes a lot easier. So you can have a centralized library of your Terraform root modules. Those Terraform root modules can exist in a centralized location, and you can vendor those in to the infrastructure repositories that depend on them. This is similar to, but different from, another familiar tool called Terragrunt. And Terragrunt also supports the concept of remote root modules. However, what it does is it will pull those down just in time into a cache folder and run them, which makes sense. But what we don't like about it is now you have this code that's distributed all over the place, and trying to find where something is a lot harder than when you vendor it into your repository. Plus, in line with immutable infrastructure, it is kind of nice to have a copy of that root module that you depend on, especially if that root module exists outside of your organization. So you have no control if that root module disappears or not. Enforcing standards, organizing related components to folders. These are more Atmos specific best practices. Yeah, and this is related to that code generation one. So these here are just more opinionated recommendations by Cloud Posse for how to do infrastructure, but I'll go into those in detail right now. All right, any questions? Any other best practices that you follow at your company that you'd like to bring up that's in line with these types of things?
I think the one thing that probably isn't, excuse me, explicitly called out there, but I would also always just mention is documentation, like good documentation for your modules, especially if the larger your consumer base is of the modules, the better your documentation really should be, so that it's very clear like what its intention is, how it works, what parameters are there, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that goes a long way to say whether or not I'll use a module, is how well it's documented and makes sense to me. So
Yeah, and sorry I didn't share those links to the best practices here.
it looks like Aaron also has his hand raised. It looks like he wanted to say something.
Oh, hey, Aaron.
Hi. I noticed you asked what we were doing, and I noticed that one of your best practices here was using a mono repo for resource modules. And we do that. We have a single GitHub repo for a bunch of Terraform modules that represent individual components, like, for example, a single Lambda or a single S3 bucket or something. And my question about that is, how do you version those things? What we do is we have subdirectories that are named after semvers, which I know might make some eyes roll, but it does allow us to evolve, like, what is a Lambda? How is a Lambda deployed without breaking existing implementations? Like, is that how you guys do it? How else do you version these small component modules?
Yeah, so just one point of clarification, first of all. So as it relates to modules, I want to be clear that that often is referring to child modules. For child modules, we still predominantly use a poly-repo approach, so multiple repos with that module in. And that's clear, like if you go to github.com/cloudposse, we clearly do not have a monorepo strategy for modules. We have 183 Terraform repositories. Now that's extreme because we have a lot of modules. But as it relates to what we were just talking about for Atmos and components, so components are your Terraform root modules. Root modules are distinctly different from child modules in a number of ways. So one way, root modules, they're the things that have state. They have a providers.tf. They have a backend configuration. They have your, versions, locks go in there.
Yeah.
They are, Terraform doesn't really have a native way of working with remote root modules. Yep. Technically, the Terraform init command supports a from module argument, and then you can have it vendor in a remote module. That's how TerraGrunt works under the hood. Mm-hmm. But the idea is that Terraform itself was only designed to work on local source code. So that's why we then went also with this. That's one of the other driving forces behind using a monorepo, because the code has to exist locally anyways. And then to answer your question, how do you version it? Exactly what you said. We do something similar to that. It might be the just pinned to the major, or you can do something more specific to major, minor, and patch. It all depends on what level you need. One of the reasons, and I don't point it out here why we recommend this approach, but the idea here is when you don't practice this, what often ends up happening in an organization is you have lots of different parts of your infrastructure pinned to lots of different versions of, say, the VPC, when what you want in reality is everything to be converging on the same version as fast as possible. And sometimes you recognize that that won't happen right away, that convergence. So you're instead saying we are deliberately diverging our environment from where we want to be. So in this case, if we have V1 of the VPC and V2 of the VPC, obviously what we want is everything to converge on V2 of the VPC, but maybe some things need to stay on V1 of the VPC for some extended amount of time for, whatever reasons. And that's why we've adopted that approach. For the most part, we are avoiding versioning the components this way, because for the most part, we want all environments to be always converging on the same version.
Yeah.
And the way we handle that convergence is through the release or the deployment process through CICD. So when you merge into main, whatever change that is, you're saying you want that everywhere. But you can control when it goes to dev, when it goes to staging, and when it goes to prod. And that's done through this CD process.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for explaining that. I was confused by the term components, but I guess if what you're calling, I have monolithic environments currently in my current project I'm working on, and it would be nice to be able to break up a environment like dev and everything that defines what is dev or prod into separate component root module states for performance and maintainability reasons. And I see you're calling those things components, and that makes perfect sense. This makes Atmos a more interesting proposition to me. I'll have to look more into it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's a good point, and you're just giving ammunition to Matt here. Matt has made it clear multiple times that it's very confusing for people coming from Terraform what components are, because they're just root modules. And why don't we just call them root modules? The long story short is that we design Atmos to be toolchain agnostic, but Terraform is the largest use case for the tool. So that's why the naming is component as opposed to Terraform root module, because if you're deploying a Helm chart or Docker image or a Helm file, Terraform root module would make no sense. I guess one argument is, well, we should just call them what they are in the tool that they are.
Yeah, that's my argument.
The term in a generic kind of sense makes sense, because if you think of dev as like all of the different microservices that put it together, all of those are components. I'm making my double quote fingers here of a larger whole, which is the dev environment. So the term makes sense, I think.
And then stacks will make sense for you, because a stack is then, well, what is my dev environment? It's all of these components combined.
Okay, I see. Okay.
Matt, I see you came on camera. You have something to add to this? I'd be really curious.
Yeah, I actually liked when you guys created the components term. Though I realize it is, complicated, and it does, make things a bit confusing. But I think that really I'll just go on my quick rant that I've done multiple times for my team. If they ever watch this, they'll roll their eyes. HashiCorp screwed up. Like, they just screwed up by using the word root module and child module. They should have named those two things differently, because that's the root problem, right? Like they overloaded the module term, the term module, and made it mean two different things. And I ask, hey, what is the difference between a child module and a root module in interviews to prospective, like Masterpoint people that we're hiring, and it's 90% of the time they could be working on Terraform for years and they have no idea, and it's amazing. And it's like that one page in the documentation, and people don't know it, and it's because it's confusing, and the people who created Terraform just did a poor job of their terms that they use. So I've always liked component, just because it gives me a better way of saying, hey, this is the thing that we actually plan and apply, and it's not overloaded. So that said, I totally get Matt's point too, that it's also we're muddying the waters, and it's creating,
I'm going to create top of this page that just calls this out incredibly clearly. I thought I did this more and more, but I guess I didn't. Go on, Matt.
Yeah, no. My argument is just that as an industry, we do a terrible job of naming, and to create more layers of abstraction for very little benefit, in my opinion, is really what causes the confusion. Like if we, in our stack configs, if we had, you know, instead of components Terraform, we just had like Terraform or root modules or whatever, and then we had Helm files or we had whatever we want as the thing that we're actually implementing, it would be so much clearer, and you would never have to explain to someone what is in a component. And the number of man hours now that we have explained what a component is to all of our different customers and every team member that's on the customers and every team member that joins Cloud Posse and every person on this call and could have been spent doing something more constructive, in my opinion. Like that's how, like I'm on this kick too recently about just like oversimplify everything, because like things are already too complex. So even if we come up with the most elegant engineering solution, that isn't always the best solution to something. Like the simpler solution is oftentimes the better solution because people can understand it without having to explain a lot of it. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So that's my soapbox version of this thing. But I don't win all battles for sure.
But running with this, Matt, I'm just curious if so for example, if under components, instead we called it what the artifact was. So here, Helm charts, root modules, or something like that. Would that make more sense? Also, I think at some point we had considered it, but the other annoying thing is when you get too much hierarchy. So like under Terraform, it would be perfect to say root modules, and under root modules, you would have all of these. But oops. Here. Yeah, and then under root modules, you would have, you know, these here, for example. But then I think it's too overly hierarchical.
Yeah. Or you can just, like in this case, if you need it all under a single root, it could be something like that is already universally accepted, like artifacts. Like these things are like artifacts. Like a Terraform root module is an artifact. A Helm chart is an artifact. You know, whatever else we might support under there, a Docker file is an artifact. You know,
well, what's produced from the Docker file is an artifact. I guess.
Yeah.
Part is compiled, it has an artifact, but
yeah,
I don't know, it gets
or something. You know.
Into.
Yeah, but in any case, my point is that calling these things components, when we Cloud Posse, you know, a tiny slice of the Terraform community, you know, not to, you know, diminish what we've done, but when we invent a term, it's really hard to get like people to look at that and immediately know what it is. Where if they said root modules, that everyone would know or should know what a root module is if they work in Terraform and they read the docs in Terraform. And it's HashiCorp's job to educate everyone what that is, not Cloud Posse's job to educate everyone what that is. And those are the kinds of things that I argue for, I guess, in that case. So, and anyone who wants, oh, sorry, God, we have a weird timing issue. Go ahead.
I was just saying, for what it's worth, it's in the back of my mind, and I am trying to think of what we can do to continue to make it easier to understand by some of that. But I don't know, then, yeah, I think there's two sides of this, right? We want it to be super simple to get started early, but then we also don't want to, walk ourselves into a corner by not supporting like some of the more complicated use cases as well. For example, like part of what's interesting is we have this concept of the design patterns, and these lean heavily on kind of pure CS concepts of programming and how they relate to infrastructure architecture. But I think it goes over the head for a lot of people who aren't knee deep in this stuff. So coming up with the same thing as design patterns, but I don't know what to call it, but what are design patterns for non-cloud architects? Like for your friendly developer who wants to just get some stuff done, like dev product staging, design pattern, I guess, but not what we have here.
Yeah, I think my counter argument to some of what you're saying though is that by using industry standard computer science terms, like we don't have to teach someone like instead of like if we didn't call it inheritance, like and we called it like sophisticated configuration copying or something, like we came up with a term for it,
Yeah,
like
yeah,
we would have to explain what that is all the time. But by virtue of the fact that we've called it inheritance, anyone that's ever worked in computer science understands what inheritance is, right? There's a tree, and at the top of the tree you set values, and then you override the values as you go down the tree, and the things that are on the bottom of the tree take precedence over the things that are on the top of the tree, right? Like we get that as a computer science concept because we've all at some point studied some form of computer science. But when we make up some term, no one studied that, so you have to explain the whole thing, or you have to make an analogy to something that everyone else has studied. And it's just like an extra cognitive load that isn't necessary, in my opinion. Again, like the opinions expressed here are only my own.
I got you.
Anyway.
All right, cool. So that was those things. Any other announcements we didn't catch this week? Something we should bring up? All right. So Q&A of the people that we have on the call. This guy is familiar. That's me. You know what I'm looking for? Just trying to put the word out as much as possible and getting feedback in. Are any open source bots, presumably, or actions, but I'm not sure that'll work, to help an organization like Cloud Posse, who has a lot of open source repositories, to have more contributors, people able to review and merge and test pull requests that can come from untrusted sources, and do that without adding the people to your actual organization, which gets expensive. $20+ a seat headcount when you're on GitHub Enterprise. So lots of organizations do this. Kubernetes is a big one. They have Prow has chat ops, and you'll see like you can labels type okay to test if you have permission, and then the bot wakes up and then run the tests on Jenkins, and all of that is open source actually, how Kubernetes does that, but it's hyper opinionated to GitHub Actions and GitHub and Jenkins and the Kubernetes project. So it's not really that reusable. I think it's not built with that in mind, that it should translate to other open source projects. So we've spent far too much time on this trying to figure out the right way of doing it. I've been hoping that I can get it to work with Mergify, and then hoping I could get it to work with Mergeable. And I just keep coming back to the solution that I think this is only possible if you build your own bot and build it as a GitHub app and give it the permissions that it needs. And that's not a big deal per se. I was just hoping that we didn't have to, we have enough to manage. I don't want to manage this as well. Anybody know how some successful open source projects are handling giving, these abilities to developers that are vetted in some way to test pull requests and so forth? All right, that's a bummer.
Is one question, because I know we're, at time. But is this the idea here, is that you don't want to add the maintainer team to the org and try and manage all of that? You want to instead have it just be a list of, vetted people that's separate from GitHub seats.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Some GitHub seats. And it also impacts so then if you want to use some of these other tools with GitHub, It's based on the number of seats you have, even though that tool isn't going to be used by those seats. So it has I can't say the word, multiplicative effects doing that. And it's precluded us from doing some of the things I want to do at Cloud Posse because we have that. And our seat count is effectively doubled because we have the maintainers crew in there. So, yeah. And then, God forbid, you add GitHub Advanced Security, and then that's an extra $40 per seat per person. I mean, you're talking $60 to add one per month per maintainer.
Are you thinking about adding that?
I partially because we are all about coming up with the opinionated processes and implementation of features on AWS and on GitHub. So part of the reason why we upgraded to GitHub Enterprise is so we could develop better enterprise solutions around GitHub and GitHub Actions. And the same would be true for advanced security. Anyways, remains to be seen. But I don't know, I'm leaning, Matt, towards I mean, I don't think this is a complicated bot to write. It's literally responding just to a few different commands, running it by a vetted list. If we run the bot in oh, what's the main bot framework? I forget what it's called, but it already supports hierarchical configurations in different repositories out of the box.
With AI, it feels like it would be a pretty easy thing to just stitch together the few GitHub API requests that you'll need to do.
Oh,
but
yeah.
to your point, I get the, hey, now I don't want to maintain that long term. It would be really nice if there was something that just somebody else's problem.
Oh, you know, I know I know we're over time, and if you guys got to run, I understand. I need to vent a little bit on one thing. So, Matt, we had DHH has been a big proponent of all these things about like why, why they're leaving the cloud, and then there's a lot of criticism of why that argument is wrong in some ways. And both sides are right at the same time is my conclusion. As a small business owner, we're using AWS the way our customers use AWS. The difference is our customers have 100 million in the bank and we don't. And running AWS for some of these things, we spent enormous amount of time on the underpinnings, the infrastructure as code and the best practices and doing all that. And then like our documentation site right now, something is wrong and the Lambdas are taking too long to run and it's costing us $200 freaking a day because they're timing out. And it's a static site. And like, Matt's been saying, well, you should just use Vercel or whatnot. And I want to say he's wrong, but he's right. And for the same reasons, though, that some of this stuff just doesn't belong even in AWS when we don't need it at the stage of scale. Yeah, we'll end up sometimes, not getting the HA level that we would have gotten in AWS. But right now, our static site documentation on S3 and CloudFront is costing us 2 to 3 times what our Kubernetes clusters are costing us. And yeah, it's our problem. We have a misconfiguration. Our LAN was timing out, node wasn't upgraded or something. Fine, that's on us. But still, it's just like it shouldn't be.
It's the maintenance burden that's brutal when you're like rolling your own thing or building something yourself. And I feel like going with the simpler solution can look really intriguing. But there's always the platform thing too. It's like, hey, you add Vercel into the mix and suddenly now you need to manage users in Vercel. Suddenly, everything that you have.
I'm not saying we're going to be as a company promoting Vercel, but it's kind of like, right now I'm feeling like I really wish our documentation site was just in Vercel.
Yeah. You could switch to Amplify. We push a lot of people towards Amplify. Not the back end stuff. Don't touch that. That's a huge dumpster fire. But the front end Amplify hosting stuff is solid.
Yeah, the only reason we're running Lambdas is because we have some of our content is behind a paywall for our customers. So we have like
Aha.
a Lambda that's doing some authentication and checking headers and all of that kind of stuff. And something is not working right there. So it's
at least it's
running
not
way
like
more times than it should.
yeah, at least it's not like $30 a month or $40 a month where or $40 a day or something along those lines where it would be like, do we want to spend the engineering hours to like go and fix it? It's like, you should go and fix that today because that's legitimate money.
Yeah.
I actually ran into something similar in terms of it's surprisingly difficult to just have a static site on AWS with some sort of auth. Like there is no good way to do it. Like no good, simple,
Well,
drop dead easy way.
yeah, their answer would be use Cognito, right? But that's not that easy. So yeah.
So it's a
We
huge
agree.
apparatus to get anything done. Like everything is enterprise grade kind of. You just wanted to get that little site up. Oh yeah. You deploy your IDP, deploy Cognito, deploy your API gateway, deploy this, deploy your Lambdas, get your CI/CD pipeline up, get your. All I wanted was a freaking little site with authentication.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
For what it's worth, I'm gonna drop it here. Is my the site the tool that I found to be the most developer friendly to get complex authentication scenarios up and running is that clerk.dev. It works with almost everything on the front end. It's super simple to configure. Their pricing is really reasonable. There's like everything about it. I've really loved them for a while now. So I discovered them after we wrote this, what we did the first iteration. We haven't gone back and tried to fix it, but I've been super happy on a few side projects I've used them on and a few other things that that it just works like really easily.
Yeah,
That's
nice.
awesome. There's a local company here in Denver called Fusionoth that has, I believe, what is like a similar product. Though the clerk site like looks really nice. They did a good job.
Yeah,
like that components view is sweet.
Yeah, and they have like drop-in React components for authentication, for user management, for profile management, for a bunch of other things that you can throw in there. You can authenticate with basically like anything you can think of that you'd want to authenticate with, kind of from a SAML perspective, or Google or GitHub or Facebook or whatever. Like there's a whole ton of things in there, and it plugs into like every major like web framework, on the back end. So anyway, there's my commercial for them. They can thank me later. They're really good.
That's cool.
Anything's better than Cognito, right?
Yeah, this is definitely better than Cognito. and it even supports the like what do you call it? Like they have a store that like a property store, a key value store that you can set up to have like custom parameters like you store per user and a whole bunch of other things. So it's pretty sweet how it all works. And their docs are really good.
So this would work then within Docusaurus because it has React components.
Yeah, that was my next suggestion was going to be maybe we should switch over to this.
Yeah, well, no, I would love to do that. If it solves it for that price, then that's the way to go, and then can have more levels or greater levels of granularity and access controls, which is something we can't do with our current solution.
Yeah,
so
this way you can have people. It supports the whole concept of like an organization, so you can have like a customer maps to an organization, and then you can give specific like permissions to different organizations and that kind of thing. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right. Well, I got something out of that. That was cool. I want to look into that. What's the lift of something like this to get implemented? It's not much.
No, you literally just import the components and drop them on your page, and then you just have to have like
It's authenticated, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, the framework that you're using has to support like basically like the middleware piece to load it to check that there's a user loaded, so but JavaScript, I'm not sure how Docusaurus works, but anyway. We'd have to check on that, but I know it definitely works in Next because I use it there.
Wait, oh no, I thought I landed on the Clerk site and built with Docusaurus, but I think it's different Clerk.
No, that's the same thing. That's Redwood. Redwood JS that's so you can use Clerk with Redwood.
Okay. I don't know what Redwood is.
Oh, it's another one of those like tools.
Okay.
So
I gotta run. See you, folks.
All right. Thank you. Yeah, I gotta run too. Thanks, everyone. Take
see
care.
everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Mike.
Take care.